Mark, as many of you may know, I think he researched this for 5 years. I know he took 2 suitcases of books with him off to Aspen, Colorado when he was writing the libretto. There are, I think, 88 footnotes to this. And I've read the opera libretto 4 times, and I confess to you all that I have cried every time I have read it. Now, part of that is, as a French Dominican nun told me once, "Vous êtes une Magdalene," which you are a Magdalene, so you weep, I weep at the opera. Okay, well, I think some of you do the same thing probably. But it's profoundly moving, and I will also say that it is an opera that, while I do not agree with everything in it, not by a long shot, but while I don't agree with it, it has moved me intensely. And I think that there is, in that poetic definition of truth, how something can be true if it's not factual, there is a deep truth in many ways to what he has created as a composite picture of who Mary Magdalene might have been. It's also a deeply personal vision, so I return back to that theme I struck at the beginning of my talk, the question of, who do you say I am? And I think that we will all go to this opera and have our own experience and hopefully leave with more questions than we walked in the door with. That it will lead us to our own search for the truth that's in our own hearts. But what I'm about to do right now is to go through some key points of the opera to tell you, where did it come from? What are the historical places? What is he weaving together to create his tapestry? His tapestry. And his tapestry is different than mine and is different than yours. We each have our own relationship to this material that we will bring. Her first aria, her first communication with us is completely redolent of the imagery that we have here in this beautiful mystical poem. There's references to the cedars of Lebanon, to leopards, to searching through the city streets, to wine, the bridegroom, the garden, honey, apricots. And of course, as we just learned, this is not a new invention of Mark's. The Song of Solomon's, the Song of Songs, has been intimately connected with Mary Magdalene for centuries. So I think it's rather a stroke of genius the way he weaves this in throughout the entire opera. And she very much then functions as the role of the Shulamite who is wandering through the streets, searching for the beloved, longing, yearning, hoping for love. That is part of her character throughout, from beginning to the end. Actually begins where Pope Gregory was in many ways, of her in being taken in a state of adultery. And if you get to read the libretto, you'll note the footnote that says, "This is not factually true. I do this for dramatic reasons." And you got to give him credit. It's a pretty dramatic opening, right? He has her caught in the act of adultery, and she's being taken away to be stoned. So she's conflated with not just Luke's penitent sinner, but also the woman taken in adultery. The character of Mary Magdalene is that of a courageous, intelligent, unconventional spiritual seeker and leader. And how does Mark come to that? Well, it's certainly implied in the canonical Gospels, where she is the faithful witness when others are fearful of being there. It's certainly present in Pistis, Sophia, Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Thomas, and Gospel of Philip. So he's drawing on both sources, canonical and non-canonical, to create her character. Then there's this aspect of the deep connection in this opera between Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary. And they have some profound moments in this opera, some really moving interchanges between these two women. It has so much gravitas in the way that they are relating to one another. And this is Mark's invention. We don't have this anywhere in the Bible. We do not have it in the Gnostics. So when you go, appreciate what he's doing in terms of character development as he has the two of them interact with one another. Then there's the question of the erotic relationship with Jesus, which of course is one of the hot buttons. I will tell you that historically some of the things that people have argued about is that they say on Exhibit A, well, he was a Jewish man and he was a Jewish rabbi. And it's an imperative in the Jewish religion to go forth and create children. So it would have been really unusual and maybe even scandalous to have a Jewish rabbi who wasn't married. A lot of angelic relationship with Jesus, of course, also does draw on the Song of Solomon, this beautiful, gorgeous love poem between the Shulamite and the king, and how they're searching and yearning for each other. And the fact that that was considered to be part of the tradition for Mary Magdalene from the earliest days, and that in fact the Gospel of John draws heavily on the Song of Solomon in its creation of this encounter between Mary Magdalene and Jesus in the garden that's just redolent with all kinds of imagery drawn from this, implies at least a sublimated eros. And then there is the rivalry with Peter. This is a picture by Raphael, and I find it very interesting that we have Peter turning away and Mary Magdalene looking straight at us. That tension between Peter and Mary is very present in this opera. It is front and center from the very beginning. And Mark is relying specifically on the Pistis Sophia and the Gospel of Mary. And here's that famous little piece of the Da Vinci's Last Supper that, that some people have suggested is Mary Magdalene here and Peter with a gesture of antagonism towards her. And so that relationship between the two of them is a very dynamic one. But I want to say again, too, I was surprised by the complexity that Mark Adamo is able to draw out. That I was really afraid that Peter was going to just be all bad, and he's not. That he's very human, and the relationship between them has a beautiful moment towards the end. And then there's that phrase that I'm going to make Mary male. In the Gospel of Thomas, in the Logion 22, the saying that's very intriguing is, the question is asked, when will we enter into the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus responds, when you are able to make two become one, the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, the higher like the lower, so that a man is no longer male and a woman female, but male and female become a single whole. That's another one of those koans. Go home, chew on it, think about it for a while. In the world traditions, though, this idea is a deeply held spiritual ideal. So you'll find in the iconography of the East, in Hinduism, a figure called Ardhanari of the divine as being half male and half female. You will find that same idea in the yin and the yang. And then finally, we go into the resurrection. The scene here, and the pivotal scene in this opera. I think that it's interesting, the parts that Mark in his opera kind of leaves spacious. He doesn't actually, he leaves there room for our own imagination. But I will say that in this scene, it's very much drawn from that Gospel of John, that tender, intimate scene in which she encounters through tears, thinking that he's the gardener, and then finding a connection with him that opens up her heart. And I just can't get through it without a box of Kleenex. This is Fra Angelico's image of her reaching out to him. You can see the hoe in the background, right there. That sense of longing and yearning. And that is what Mark leads us into with this opera. These deep questions there. And ultimately, the biggest question of all has to do with that word anthropos. And it's just a word I invite you to consider for a moment. What does it mean to be fully human? What does it mean to be your fullest self? You know, the ancient Greeks really believed, and they really lived this, that opera was not something like TV that you watch for entertainment. Opera was something that you went to have your heart broken up and open, to be transformed. And it would change the world if you did that. It would change the world. They let prisoners out of prison to come to their theater because they thought it was so important to the community. So important. And I think there's the potential in this opera to have a real community dialogue about questions that matter. Not who's going to win the Best Picture Oscar, not what did Jessica Alba wear, none of that, but questions that matter. What does it mean to be fully human? What does it mean to live a life that's integrated between sexuality and spirituality, between hope and despair, between love and the spiritual life? And for me, I'm so excited about this opera because it asks us to ask those questions and talk about those things.